Hello, everybody, and hello and welcome to this roundtable dedicated to offshore wind in France. I'm very particularly happy to have this roundtable for a very important topic because offshore wind is really booming in France right now. And I'm particularly happy also to have this great panel because we have a tremendous experience in offshore wind on the table here. We could maybe say that we've got here some of the pioneers of offshore wind in France. So I'm very happy to start that with you. They've seen it basically all for 15 years and helped to shape the industry in France as we know it for now. So it's normal that after President Macron's announcement of 40 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2050 and the signature of the sector deal with Prime Minister Castex planning the installation of 18 gigawatts by 2035, that we asked them if now we're starting a new era, basically in offshore wind in France, and what does our industry in the country needs really to become a cornerstone of the French electric system. So with no further ado, I will start with you, Filippo Cimitan. You are the managing director for Siemens Gamesa in France. I think you're particularly affected by everything that's happening now because you've heavily invested in the country with your factory in Normandy, in Le Havre. So how basically did you welcome President Macron's announcement and the sector deal? Is it a relief for you to get this visibility? Is it enough for you to rest and be assured that your factory is full and jobs are secured, or is there still work to do?
Thanks, Cedric, and good morning, everyone, and thanks also RWE for hosting this roundtable. Yes, indeed, the announcement of Macron earlier this year are quite positive announcement. Also looking forward for Siemens Gamesa in the country, together with the signature of the sector deal. On one side, we are relieved by seeing the government taking seriously the situations in terms of CO2 targets emission by 2050, and also realizing the potential of France in the offshore arena. It's on one side also somehow, a rational assessment by the President Macron, also looking at the RTE report issued in October, where anyway the trajectory for offshore wind was set very high by at least 40 to 50 gigawatt by 2050. And this is seen as like a necessary contribution to the energy mix by that date. So on one side, yes, it's positive. It set a trajectory which was needed and was asked by all associations since a while, and set a trajectory. On the other hand, it's exactly what data show that France needs to achieve that zero target emission by 2050. So a mix of relief and positive outlook in the future, but also, let's say, the minimum that was needed to fulfill the technical needs in terms of electricity by 2050. And then what's still to be done, it's to put the words and the targets into reality. And we know by experience that in France, that's not always easy and not always a given. So again, we have a new trajectory with a very important midterm milestone of 2035, 18 gigawatts, which is for us even more important than the one at 2050, because really sets a short-term target where we can monitor progresses and see if the means by the government are in line with the ambition and expectations. So for us now, it's about seeing how the new government, the next government, will translate these targets into measures, into means, and into a proper planning of the potential that the country has.
Thank you, Filippo. Thanks a lot. You mentioned the work of associations in shaping all these objectives. So it's kind of normal that I ask you this question as well, Mathieu, because you were basically at the heart of the negotiation in the last couple of weeks with the government on the signature deal. We know not everything was easy. So with all your this experience, what can you say about this announcement? Are we just witnessing a publicity stunt during election time, because we are now, if you haven't noticed, in election time, in pretty serious election time in France? Or is all of this real? Is really France taking offshore seriously? And in your opinion, is there still room for improvement?
Thank you, Cedric, and very pleased to meet you again here in Bilbao. As you said, negotiation in France is never easy. It's an art. We love public debate, and the government loves it too. So basically, as Filippo said, we do that for climate change. We are very late. The latest report of IPCC is, let's say, very, very worrying. And we also had, and sadly, the context of the war in Ukraine. So for geopolitical reasons, we have to accelerate and to boost development of low carbon energies. In France, as you know, we had this report from our TSO RTE requested by the government to reach carbon neutrality by 2050. And the role of renewables, especially wind energy and offshore wind, will be key. It has been shown and demonstrated. So basically, the government chose to confirm the first ambition on offshore wind development. Also because, and I think Filippo did not mention it, but we can be proud that we have 1/3 of offshore wind production capacities in France at the European level. So that's quite a performance when you only have one wind turbine in operation. So I think the government saw the interest of industrial benefits for the territories, and it makes sense when you have the second potential of offshore wind in Europe to make a deal and to boost the ambitions. So as Filippo also said, it's very important to have an intermediate milestone. That is to say, not to talk about 2050 only, but also to say, okay, what should we do in the next 10 years? IPCC report says 3 years. But we know that offshore wind is a long-term story, but we have to make sure that we delete fossil fuels from our energy mix. That is on 2/3 fossil fuels. So basically, that was a real satisfaction that government decided to choose a trajectory. That's a first start, but we have to confirm this, as you said, with the elections, national elections for the president and the parliament in the next months. So that's only the beginning of negotiations, actually.
Only the beginning, yet it's been a long time that offshoring is growing in France, at least in all the discussions that we've had for more than a decade. And Pierre, you've been there at the beginning, more than 15 years in the game. You've initiated the FECAM project, and you're now leading RWE's offshore team in France. So with all your personal experience and your company's track record in Europe and in the world, what's the reaction after this announcement? What's the perception? Is it like, is France now really becoming a sort of Eldorado, or is there still some skepticism?
Well, glad to be here. In France, we have good cheese, we have good wines, we have beautiful landscape, and I'm pretty sure that in the future we'll have a very strong offshore wind industry. And sorry, there's other very interesting products as well in France. But offshore wind is going to happen. We have several offshore wind projects under construction. I think that's a very good step. Of course, it takes time. But if I look back to my background and the context when I started to work in offshore wind in France in 2007. We were having long-term targets to reach 6 gigawatts by 2020. Finally, these targets has been pushed back to the same level by 2028. We will most likely not reach these targets, but so far and right now with this announcement of the president, with the sector deal that has been signed, with several call for interest that have been launched for the offshore wind industry in France to support the outboards, to support the industrials to invest in France with all the simplifications that has been done also in regard of the development timeline. And I think that's the key issue in France. It's take too much time to develop a project because the procedures were complex. They are still complex, but they were pretty much complex than today. And I'm sure Hélène will speak around this kind of consideration. Now we see the future with more optimism, and we have various auctions ongoing. We are currently working on 3 auctions, and there's a lot of competitors as well who are investing in France. I remember for the first auction in 2012, and the same for 2014, only 2 competitors per zone. If we compare to the auction in northern part of Europe, what was significantly very low. And today, for the first auction offshore in Normandy, we have 6 candidates. With several joint ventures. For Brittany, we have 10 candidates. So it seems that France is being more attractive, and that's because we have a large potential, and a lot has been done so far over the last 15 years.
Thanks, Pierre. Back to you, Hélène. You've also been in the business for some time now, and you were particularly at the heart of a lot of regulatory improvements that we've had in France in 2018, 2019. So what's your view on what's happening now? Is it like just the conclusion of what we initiated back in the days? Or is it just a new phase now with new objectives and probably even new regulatory works to be done?
Well, I think it's been a long time. I mean, it's you mentioned 27, and yes, we made lots of progress since then. And the announcement of the president in Belfort was finally happening. I mean, we had many announcements, firm announcements that we need offshore wind in France. For many years, we struggled to convince the governments, several governments, whatever ministry was, that we need offshore wind in France, that we had the chance to have plenty of areas in France to make offshore wind projects, and that we cannot leave offshore winds for other European countries, and that if it's working for other European countries, it must work for France. And back then, we remember that at some point we had still to convince the state that we cannot build offshore project under recourse. It was just a nonsense for them. It was just, well, what is the problem with recourses, with litigation? You can build, you have the authorization, let's go for it. And we said, well, you don't know what is an offshore project at all. So for probably 10, 15 years, we had to convince them that offshore projects are big projects that are mandatory for France to achieve the objectives. So finally, we have this announcement coming from also plenty of years trying and convincing that a specific regulatory framework is needed also to have those projects. And we came to a point where this framework is basically in place, not really implemented yet, because, well, we have some other issues, but still we have progresses in litigation, also in the permitting aspect. What is the authorization we need for an offshore project? And so now we are in a situation where the framework is more or less in place, and we only needed some choice from the state, from the authorities to say, well, now we need offshore wind. We cannot do without. And it's really a game changing in France, and we are hoping that in a few weeks, nothing will be jeopardized again. So it's the election period in France, and it's always a question. So yeah, it's the beginning of a new era where everything is in place, and the industry is in place, the factories are here, the projects are here, everyone wants it. So now let's go for it.
Let's go for it. Yeah, I like that. So you all seem to go more or less in the same direction. We're just living a historical moment, a sort of shift. But there's still a lot of work to do. You mentioned the elections. It's obviously a moment of uncertainty for everybody, obviously. But let's imagine if you were a candidate and you were happening to win the election. Let's imagine what would be, let's say, your top 2 or 3 measures that you'd like to implement on your first 100 days, your first 6 months for offshore wind. Who wants to start?
I can start.
Yeah.
For that.
Go ahead.
Just to remind that it's very important to vote, so it's on Sunday in France for the French people only, and I will do so, of course. I will not present myself for information. But if I was a president, clearly what means for the offshore wind business in France and to expand the developments is to do the maritime spatial planning. So far, the areas that have been identified by the state for launching the first auctions have been worked previously by developers in a system where auctions was not the rule. So we were working on greenfield development, and I think many developers did a great job to find the suitable areas and to consult with the local persons to get the agreements with the fishermen, with the associations. But finding a zone is very difficult, especially in this context, because the maritime seas, we have new rules to protect the ocean, Natura 2000, for example, some natural park as well that has been created, and it's very important to identify the suitable areas. There is a large potential. I think it's 370,000 square kilometers available for offshore wind in France. If we reach 40 gigawatts, it's only a couple of percent. I think it's 2.5% of this global maritime space. So we need to define this. We need to clearly set the targets per seafront as well. And last, I think we need also to perhaps revisit a little bit the auction system, because it takes too much time. For Dunkirk, 3.5 years for one auction, 3.5 years. That's quite a lot, but we will minimize the delay. If we can launch several gigawatts per auction, either 2 gigawatts, 4 gigawatts, or 6 gigawatts per auction, that could be a massive change. And this is something that is under development in other parts of Europe as well.
I see you want to react, Hélène, right?
Yeah, of course, I agree with those, this statement. I mean, it's just that I don't think we have to change something in the auction system. We just need more people in the authorities to deal with this system, and more money to launch the studies, because for Dunkirk it was a little bit specific because they waited a long period of time for the regulatory framework to be in place so that they could attribute the area within a certain framework. So it was a little bit specific, but for the fourth call for tender, the actual one, the question is only that we wait for the studies, for the initial state of the environment and some studies that are needed for the bidders to make their bid. It's not the system, it's the question of the money, of the willingness to put some leaders in the sea, or to do whatever studies is requested. So I think that the question is, how many people do we have in the authorities, in the DGOC, so the specific bureau in the ministry that deals with the auction? How many people do we have? If we have more people, we can launch more auctions. If we have more people, they can deal with the studies. If we have more money, you can have more experts on the areas to de-risk the areas, and then it could work. The problem is not the framework, it's only the people and the money, and at the end of it, the willingness to do it. So maybe with the announcement in Belfort, we will now have the willingness. Everyone knows how to go for those megawatts. how to develop those megawatts. It's not a magic question. It's a question of willingness, of money, of people.
Just to react on that, I think it's just when I say revisit the auction system, it's just to rationalize the auction system. I mean, so far we are working on free auctions at various stages. And obviously for developers, it's a nightmare because you are on pre-qualification stage. Sometimes you are at the end of the dialogue phase. You're entering into the dialogue phase. So in terms of organization, that's very difficult. So I think we could launch auctions, one auction with several projects to be attributed. Like in MED, for example, we'll have one auction, 2 projects. And in this way, we will also minimize the resource needed by the states. So we have to face with limited resources. But I think it's more in this direction we can think around.
And what President Monnier thinks.
Yeah. Basically, my competitors stole my program, so I have to have some elements, intelligent elements. So I would say that we also need to be ready for infrastructures because we have to take a change of scale. The previous trajectory was 1 gigawatt per year. It should be now a minimum 2 gigawatt per year. And we have to be ready for harbors infrastructures. We have the foundations, the first foundations, and that's a very good start. But for floating offshore wind, for instance, we have to adapt, to update, to find the good design. But also in terms of grid connection, it will be a key point in the massive deployment of offshore wind. And for tender number 4, for instance, we would need 8 to 10 years in order to connect the project. So if we accelerate on the project with the optimization, with exception law, decrease, etc., we also have to keep in mind that grid connection must be ready and must serve the objective. And that's really key. In France, we have a very good partner, the TSO RTE, very open also to new technologies, HVDC, etc. But that's quite new. But we have to make sure that they design, let's say, marine electrical system, also to find optimization with neighbors countries like Spain. Spain intends to develop offshore wind, Catalonia, for instance, and other parts. Italy, maybe we do not have the same zones to connect, let's say, the grid, but we have to make sure that infrastructures are ready. So, in my opinion, regarding the emergency in terms of energy transition, the new parliament should vote an exception law in order to accelerate a lot of procedures, also in terms of permitting, etc., etc. That's typically in the spirit of Repower EU at the European level.
I guess with your international overview as well, you concur with everything that's been said.
Yes. And first of all, I would vote for all of them, just in case, so we are good to go. I think that's quite a good package there. Definitely, I mean, we said it before, with the recent announcement, France has acknowledged the need of offshore wind. And now the question is, how do we make that happen? And making that happen means giving the means for achieving those targets, on one side on the special planning, on the other side on the government structure, whether they have the funds and they have the people to do it, and also on how we industrialize a little bit the auction systems. All of this has been said. I agree also that at the end of the day, what matters is not when you award a project, but when you install and connect the project. So from my point of view, which is the one of an industrial player, at the end of the day, it's not how many megawatts are awarded every year, how long does it take an auction, but really what have an influence in the supply chain we are investing to build in France is the time between the award and the installation. And that is a very tricky one, because we have 18 gigawatts to connect, not to award, by 2035. And if we today take 3-4 years for spatial planning, public debate, hoping that we can accelerate and install in 4 or 5 gigawatts per year by 2035, we will not make it, because the industry will not be ready. So it's important that we work also on shortening the time between award and installation, and infrastructure needs to be ready, the planning on the infrastructure needs to be ready. And then, because nobody said it, I will also add, as future president, that we have been talking about wind offshore, thinking about electricity, and the 40 gigawatt Macron has announced only refer to the need of electricity for France. But wind offshore can also very well be green hydrogen. And if we now do spatial planning and looking for 40 gigawatts, we need those 40 gigawatts for electricity. But if we also want to make green hydrogen, then we have to start all over again. Or we're gonna cannibalize those 40 gigawatts. So yes, 40 gigawatt per electricity, good. When do we start talking about 40 more gigawatts on top to do green hydrogen, which will also be much needed in France, in Europe, and elsewhere?
I think you all kind of agree with that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We can, maybe we could have an Italian president.
Perfect. So yeah, I think we all mentioned acceleration, simplification, how to go faster. We mentioned infrastructure. There's one thing that we didn't mention that much, and that is quite important in France, is acceptability, social adhesion. So just, I've seen in the exhibition of EU Formula One, and so allow me this metaphor. Can we speed up if our wheels are still in the mud? Are we going to be able to advance if we are just stuck because of acceptability and social pressure? Do you think that we still need to work as well on that, even though we had already a few improvements in the past years? And what kind of improvement can we still do? Hélène?
Yeah, well, the acceptability is a tough question because in France we don't rationalize the public debate. So we came to a point where we make people believe that they can have a word on everything and that this word could be heard. And I think it's dangerous to keep asking the same questions to people. So we had so many public debates on the PPE, so the programmation on all the kind of energy system. We also had another public debate on the SNBC, so another objective in France. We have one public debate per offshore projects. We have also public debates for other kinds of projects. And at the end of the day, and the specific commission in charge with public debates said itself said that there is too much debates and too much debates killed the debate. So people are coming to a point where they are fed up with so many debates, they don't know what is requested from them. And also at the end of the day, they are frustrated because they ask for so many changes. They don't want a project here, they rather want a project there, and they think that it's their claim. And at some point, it's not really their claim to decide whether we have jackets, whether we have monopiles, whether we have 180 meters turbines or not, 60 turbines or 80 turbines. It should not be their call because they are not experts in there. So in France, we need to rationalize the public debate and say, well, we have this global objective of 40 gigawatts. And so where shall we do this? What is the timeline, for example, but not really a debate per project. And I think that acceptability also, it's important, but we cannot, we need in France to say that we don't have the luxury to choose or not to choose offshore projects. So we cannot afford this choice. We need offshore projects, so we don't need to ask the public whether or not they agree on offshore projects. It has to be, and maybe the first choice of the new president would be that I decide to make offshore project full point. And you just get to get whether or not we're putting a lot in Brittany, a lot in the Mediterranean coast, where, when, but there will be. So this specific choice it's not working for acceptability. And at the end of the day, in France, you will still have opponents to wind energy. And that's fine. I mean, that's fine. And it's not the point. The point is we need offshore projects. And probably, I think, we didn't mention, and we are here in Wind Europe, that we need Europe also to put offshore projects, wind projects, the renewable energy on the same level as the protection of biodiversity, for example, or to say that we need firmly renewables.
I fully agree on that, and we should focus public debates and public consultation on the planning, because that's key. And the National Commission for Public Debate repeats every time that we need data on environmental stakes prior to the projects. We need more visibility for all the stakeholders, et cetera, et cetera. So the big lack of the planning was the cause of some conflicts and disorders in France on some projects or some projects to come. I think that's the biggest point. And we have to stop to make people believe that acceptability is directly linked to a public consultation on everything. That's wrong. And acceptability, that's an everyday challenge, actually. When you show that you have social and economical benefits on the territory with factories, when you speak with people on birds, fish activities, how you conceive your projects, so the dialogue typically, and then how you can associate the people to your project. And I think that it was the case on the 6 first awarded projects. That's the case on the 7th as well. But as Hélène said, we have opponents to wind energy. We have opponents to solar, to nuclear, to fossil fuels. So never mind, we used to do that. You can lead a legal action if you disagree, but we have to go ahead and to stop debates because we do not debate anymore about global warming and about geopolitical conflicts at the border of Europe. So we now have to accelerate, respecting all the stakeholders, to put them at the table and to go ahead.
I can only agree, and honestly, I believe that the real shift in the acceptability in France will come when there will be a general acceptance that offshore is not an onshore, and wind and renewable are not an option, are just a necessity. And if you look at those projects, not like as if we can or we cannot do the project, but there's a project which is a must do for the climate, but also, and this will be let's say an accelerator of that shift because of security of the production and also because of price stability, which is a common theme in Europe. So if you add these two on top of the climate targets, so renewable and offshore and onshore are needed, full stop. They are somehow securing the stability of the production, because otherwise we risk not to have electricity for in winter. And on top, you have a stable price, or much more stable than you can have today with fossil fuel, then the full debate will change. And we'll not have to talk about one piece of bird that actually might disappear anyway if we have the climate change progressing as fast as it seems. Then we'll have a major shift, and then we can really go into how to coexist at sea, inland, and really get more into the pragmatic stuff. And then we as again, an industrial player, what we are doing and our role in this acceptability is to show and enhance the economic benefit for the communities and for the countries when it comes to offshore, but onshore is the same, so that it's not just about fulfilling the climate change, saving the world, getting the electricity on winter and having a stable price. It also creating jobs, creating factories, creating new players, suppliers, and having the economy running. So honestly, when you have all these 4 topics on the table clearly accepted and explained, then the debate will change and the question will be on those who have to answer why we don't do it instead of why do we do it.
Just if I may add, indeed, the crisis on energy markets, especially in terms of price, has a clear impact on purchasing power. And if you show people that renewables being competitive can have an added value in everyday life to people, that is also a big change, because until now, we had, let's say, this fake news around the cost of renewables supported by public budget. And now that's the contrary. Actually, we finance public budget. And that's important to say it. And I did not hear French government to underline that and to finance, let's say, other kind of energies, especially fossil fuels, because of the price of gas, petrol, etc. So that's important to underline.
Just one comment from my side, and just to share my personal experience as well, because I've been initiating one project, especially in Normandy, and I've made a lot of meetings. My takeaway from this time and how the procedure is organized so far is we need to explain to the people why we are developing projects, why we want to develop renewables, the context we are working on. And I think when we take the time to explain to the people that this kind of project is an answer to the climate change, to the security of supply, to having an electricity that is affordable, then they understand. And we have a chance in France. I think it's not the case for some countries. We have very large maritime space. So at the end, we have only to find 2% of the maritime space in France to install offshore wind turbines. So I think the garden is very large. We have the possibility to exchange with the fishermen, with the associations, to find the suitable areas. We have public debates that are organized probably too much. Public debates, we need to also give targets to the public debates. And we need to also to work on the development time, because when I started to work on the project, I was discussing with the fishermen, especially and the mayors and the associations. But finally, at the end, I should have talked to the kids of these persons. And when the kids arrived to take the fishermen boats and to continue the activities, then they are not aware of the project. And the project is still under development. So long development really plays against acceptability. And if we minimize the developments, then we'll have very good acceptability, and pretty sure the projects that are under development construction so far in Saint-Nazaire, in Fécamp, in Coursol, the factories of Siemens, the factories of GEs, people will see the benefits of these activities, and I'm pretty sure acceptability will increase. And last but not least, acceptability is not too bad in France, especially in offshore wind. We are working on offshore wind, so we always see the bad messages, but in a global overview, I think there's a lot of people who are supportive of offshore wind, and we shall also emphasize this.
Yeah, because I think that the authorities try to making match acceptability with agreement. And we don't need to get to an agreement of 100% of the population. And the acceptability is really good for us in France, and especially for offshore wind project. And it's not because there's one guy that is against it for probably wrong reasons or mysterious reasons or undercover reasons that offshore projects are not welcomed in France. And they are welcome for most of the population.
Thanks a lot. All of you, we have 5 minutes left, so I would like to give the opportunity to maybe the public to ask a couple of questions if you want. So if you have any to ask any questions to our panel, don't hesitate. You can raise your hand to Eva over there and ask your questions. No? Shy public? If there is no from the public, I may have one, because, yeah, of course, it's a bonus question, because you mentioned that, Filippo, that we do not only produce electricity with offshore winds. can also be used to produce green hydrogen. It's like a trendy topic in France, hydrogen. We hear a lot about it. Do you think we are far from doing something? What do you think we still need to do to have a first project in France, like there is, for example, in Germany or in Netherlands? What are the first steps to take to start building up something in France?
If I can start, yeah, I would say regulation, because that's a trendy European topic, actually, not only French, but as you know, France decided to put money on recovery plans dedicated to hydrogen, second plan in terms of importance after Germany, and we have also big players playing in that field. But we have to make it possible. And today, if you look at regulation, especially tender conditions, you cannot imagine a nitrogen plant linked to your offshore wind project, because you have to put your own electricity into the grid, but 100%. So we have to make it possible. We have to maybe think about hybrid projects, but also in terms of support mechanism. And I think that's a start. And in parallel, we started obviously the soft and the discussions around industrial possibilities. I think Le Havre, Normandy region, and other regions around how both infrastructures are very good zones to develop it, because they need hydrogen for the industry. So I think we have to launch the discussions around regulation and also business plans.
Yeah, just one thing at the end. If we consider, and I would like to avoid the targets that has been set for offshore wind, 6 gigawatt by 2020, but are set today, I think, for electrolyzers. I think we need to reach 6 gigawatts or 7 gigawatts by 2030. 2030, it's almost tomorrow. So we need to anticipate. There is only small projects. Why it is a good idea combining offshore wind and hydrogen? Because we have a large capacity factor. We have a very low production costs. So we have an hydrogen that can be very competitive. And we have also today the consumers. France Hydrogen and other players has done maps. And we see that there is a lot of consumption to come in Normandy, in Pays de la Loire, in Med. And these three regions are also very interesting for offshore wind. So at the end, we need also to start developments. There's a lot of projects ongoing, and especially RWE is involved into many projects in this regard in Germany and in Netherlands. We are also testing to produce offshore hydrogen, but will be the first time on an offshore wind turbine. But at the end, we can transpose all these examples to France and start to think with the authorities to expand this industry that will be massively implemented into the energy mix over the next decades.
I would say that first, we probably need, again, to explain and make sure that everyone understands what is hydrogen. And hydrogen is not a production of electricity. So if to have some hydrogen projects, you need first to have projects to produce electricity. And so if you don't have our offshore projects or any other projects, you don't have hydrogen projects. So they put money on the table for hydrogen, but at the end of it, if we don't have the project behind that, it's no use. And then I would say also that probably, and from the regulatory side, I would also add some flexibility on the PPAs, not the corporate PPAs, but on the PPAs, the state aid guidelines of the European Commission, because it's so complicated to just adjust something in our state aid regimes. So, and maybe France is the worst in Europe, but it seems like they don't manage to have some flexibilities. And it's always difficult when you are entering into a process, an auction or something, to change a little bit, to add some hydrogen, because probably in 5 years, when you will build the auction 4 project, probably at this point hydrogen will be there, but you cannot, because it was not always at the beginning of it, it was not anticipated. So yeah, that's a mix also with the European regulation.
I will add only 2 things. The first is that I said before, we need 40 gigawatt more of projects before discussing about hydrogen. Otherwise, we steal the electricity we desperately need. And the second one, I really hope that we don't go through the hell of the pilots. I'm really against pilot projects. I don't like pilot projects. And hydrogen hopefully will go a little faster. We need the scale to achieve a competitiveness which make green hydrogen an everyday consumable in Europe. And especially when you look at hydrogen out of offshore wind, the turbine will be the same, and we cannot afford to build 1 or 2, 3 turbines just for a project. Foundation will be the same. The cables will be different. We'll have a pipe, but then the electrolyzer will be a module that can be, of course, scaled up. So at the end, everything is there to go faster also on size. And without the size, we don't get the competitiveness. Without the competitiveness, there won't be a market. So hopefully, like we are trying to do with floating, with some difficulties, we'll get much faster and avoid to have 10 years of projects with 1 or 2 or 3 turbines, which will kill green hydrogen for France, at least on the side of the sea. My point of view.
Thanks a lot for this great discussion. Really, it was short, but a lot of interesting information. I will conclude with one last information. If you're really interested in the French market, in the French offshore industry, please do not hesitate to come to Le Havre on June 15, between June 15 and June 17th on Synergy events. You can meet there the whole French industry of offshore wind. A lot of great people. Really don't hesitate. Yeah, Mathieu, one last thing.
Yeah, and most important thing, we have the cocktail at the French pavilion at 5 p.m. So if you want more, feel free to join.
It's a bit more important. Thanks a lot, everybody. Thanks.
Thanks.